So good morning again. I invite you all to come back from coffee break to the auditorium. There's plenty of place inside here. There's plenty of new panelists coming and procuring us interesting presentations, and there is new room for reflections, there is new room for discussions. And so I invite you all to come in again after your very fruitful coffee break. We're just awaiting you to come in to begin next session.
Has anybody got music? Have you got a tape of some music? Yes. Can they hear you outside?
I guess so, because doors are open again. So please come in again in auditorium so that we can go on with presentations. Please, all coffee breakers, move inside. Okay, so we go for it. Thank you for being here in auditorium and for attending now fifth session of our Set Plan Conference 2015. The fifth session will deal with efficient energy systems. It will be moderated by Mary Donnelly, Director General for Energy of the European Commission. So I invite you, Mary Donnelly, for some introducing words, and then we will head on with our panelists. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm very pleased to be here today and very pleased to be involved in this session because, of course, as you know, in Europe, as was clearly stated in the Energy Union paper that was adopted in February of this year, energy efficiency is our first fuel in the European Union. It is a major contributor on all of our objectives in terms of security of supply, in terms of competitiveness, both for industry and indeed for our own pockets as consumers, and it is a major contributor to our fight against climate change. In that context, energy efficiency is our first topic, although not perhaps our first topic today, but it is an essential topic for taking our energy system forward. But energy efficiency is somewhat intangible. You can't feel it and touch it or see it on the skyline as you would, for example, with a wind turbine or indeed even a PV panel. It's linked to technology, yes, but it's also linked to behaviour and the way we do things. And this diffuse nature of energy efficiency makes it just that little bit harder to capture. And so today I'm very pleased to say that we have a lineup of wonderful experts. Just a second. I need to get the titles right. We have a lineup of experts who will illustrate for us how energy efficiency manifests itself in our energy system and what people are doing in terms of delivering on this objective of energy efficiency. So I'm very pleased to say that today we have with us, starting from your left, I suppose, Katharina Krell, who is the Managing Director of Renovate Europe. Beside her, Dr. Bagwat, who is Corporate Energy Affairs for Arubis in Belgium. Then we have Monica Frassoni, who is the President of the European Alliance to Save Energy. Beside her, Jasper van den Munkhoff, who is the Manager for Energie Sprong. And last, but certainly by no means least, Jean-François Gagné, who is the Head of Energy Technology Policy Division at the International Energy Agency. I'm not going to spend and consume time here speaking, just to say that we're going to slightly rearrange the sequence of presentations. I've asked Jean-François to take the floor first because the IEA, I always find, have excellent presentations with lots of numbers and they paint the big picture, and I thought it would be interesting to do that first, and then we'll look at the specifics, including the system efficiency. Katharina and others will present to us afterwards. So I won't delay and immediately hand the floor to Jean-François.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mary, and very happy to be here and set the scene in this conference. So very happy as well because this year when we looked at our yearly publication, Energy Technology Perspectives, we wanted to take a look at how innovation per se would be able to increase ambitions towards the COP negotiations happening in a few weeks in Paris. And so it's a very timely opportunity for us to come and show some of our analysis, but also to be able to try to link the innovation side to today's topic of energy efficiency, because as Mary said, it's a fairly wide and difficult to grasp concept in many aspects. So I'll start right away, and I'm just not sure if the presentation is going to load up. There we go. So I'll start right away just to give you a bit of an overview of what we were looking at this year. I have a booth outside with executive summaries, and so I won't spend too much time on the details, but be happy to have a chat afterwards. But today, this year, what we wanted to take a look at is how innovation needs to be guided to deliver the energy policy objectives that we have to be able to move from today's trajectory to a low-carbon energy future. And of course, when we looked at innovation, we wanted to talk about those technologies that exist today, but that still require quite a bit of work in terms of removing some of the non-technical barriers. And you'll notice in that graph, the blue part of the graph, which is energy efficiency, which provides the bulk of CO2 savings when we look at the most optimal way of rolling out technologies. But of course, in this year's edition, we also looked at those technologies that are needed just to help us transition and keep the window open until new technologies can come and play their role. So that's a lot of the work that we do, is try to understand what role technology can play in meeting our energy policy objectives, but also looking at where we are today. And so every year we produce a snapshot of many technologies and how they are faring compared to what we see as the optimal rollout. And for the first time this year, our analysis showed that none of them are set to meet our 2DS scenario objectives. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't roll out a low-carbon energy future. What it does mean is we're losing quite a bit of the opportunities that these technologies provide to make this a cost-effective transition. And this is despite quite significant progress that has been provided by energy innovation. And so this is the bulk of our analysis this year. Now, for today's topic, I like Mary's mentioning of the first fuel, because what we do every year is we produce an energy efficiency market report. And last year's edition, that's where we actually analyzed what was meant by a first fuel. And when we looked at the investments made in energy efficiency over the past 40 years, we realized that those investments still produce energy services today. And in fact, they produce more services than the highest share of any other fossil fuel or renewable or traditional energy production. So that's what we mean when we say energy efficiency is the first fuel. Is when you think about not just providing energy, but providing services, that's where you get the biggest bang for the buck. But as Mary said, it's sometimes hard to understand what energy efficiency is, and so we think by presenting it as an energy resource rather than an energy saving, we may be able to get people to get their head wrapped around a bit better. Now, I've also been asked specifically to focus on heating and cooling, and this was very topical because this year we did look at what we call the elephant in the room. When you look at worldwide energy use today, heating and cooling represents a third of total primary energy use and close to a third of global CO2 emissions. So this is a topic that is often forgotten and not handled properly, we think, in terms of policies, and I'll try to give a few hints as to where there are opportunities, but of course my colleagues on the panel will give a lot more details. So if we look, for example, at what could be done in terms of reducing the energy use in heating and cooling, we find there's two aspects that need to be understood. First, direct energy use, and so basically using energy to produce heat directly, but also indirect energy use through electrification. And it's the balance between these different aspects that need to be optimized and that we find could actually allow us to reduce by 30% overall energy demand in heating and cooling. For example, if we look at the industrial sector, where there's about half of the total heating and cooling demand in the world today, we see there's a possibility to reduce by 30% overall heat demand in industry while keeping the same economic outcome. The same story applies, pretty much to the European Union, though from a different stand in terms of growth, but there are still lots of opportunities to reduce the demand for heating and cooling in industries. Now, when we look at this and how we analyze that, of course, in industry, it's not just heat for heat. It's actually optimizing the full suite of processes so that you can provide better value while at the same time optimizing your energy use, and that also includes reusing heat in your own systems. In fact, our analysis shows that there's about 30% of opportunities between now and 2050 that rely on technologies that are not commercially available today. So while adopting best acceptable practices works, there's still quite a bit of innovation that needs to be done, and private and public stakeholders need to work together to move that out. Now, I'll move quickly over to the building sector because that's another area where there's a lot of work to be done. And we find that about 50% of total building energy use worldwide is for heating and cooling load. If we look at the European Union, that actually goes to close to 3/4. So again, a lot of opportunities to make sure that we use heat properly, but also produce it adequately to meet our energy challenges. Now, in terms of a strategy to manage that, we published 2 years ago a book dedicated to transitioning the buildings energy sector, and the strategy is quite simple. First, you have to reduce your heat demand, so providing better comfort with less energy use. And then you actually need to provide that heat in an efficient way. And so we've highlighted steps in how you go from today's broad stock of more inefficient buildings to really pushing forward the best available technologies while at the same time pushing the envelope toward close to net zero energy buildings. And with policies and R&D support can help get us that way. When we look at the opportunity in terms of both reducing heat demand and providing heat effectively, we see that there's close to half and half of a split of the opportunities. And so we've written technology roadmaps that help go in more deeper in terms of what can be done. For example, one on buildings envelope and looking at where current stock performance is and what needs to happen to really get to the best available technologies and even pushing those performances a bit further. When we look at this, again, major opportunity for lots of energy reduction, and therefore it's a cost-effective transition, and the real issue is getting the market barriers out to make sure people realize that the investment they make in the envelope is going to pay back over time. Now, in terms of producing energy, there's also quite a few options, going from providing the best available technologies in terms of producing energy through heat pump technologies, which have quite a series of applications where they can provide high-efficiency heat and cooling options, but also using renewable sources like solar heating and cooling to be able to have zero-carbon energy provision while at the same time providing the right comfort level with increased economic growth. Now, what we see in our analysis is there's a great opportunity to drastically augment the market share of those technologies, almost tripling the role they can play in providing heating and cooling for the generations to come. But being able to look at these things in isolation is not the end game. What we really need to understand is how the system works effectively together. So we're doing quite a bit of work in not only looking at heating and cooling in isolation, but looking at all energy streams and really trying to link the electricity and heating systems together. If we look at the way we produce electricity today, there's a huge amount of energy that is being lost. That energy can be recuperated to combined heat and power plants and be reused either in industrial processes or through district heating and cooling systems to power homes. But when we look at how district heating, cooling, and CHP technologies are faring, we see that their share of global electricity production is actually coming down. And so there's quite a bit of work to be done on the policy front to make sure we have the right incentives to start rolling those technologies out again. And we find that one of the key issue to really highlighting that potential is understanding what waste heat exists worldwide. And though we have done a bit of work in that respect, looking at waste heat potentials and also where that waste heat is situated compared to demand centers, I want to attract your attention to one of the posters that is outside the session today that was done by Université de Lausanne and the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology that are actually taking that analysis and really bringing it closer so that these types of tools can be used to identify where the potential is. And identifying the source to save energy to improve efficiency is important, but the other goal that can be looked at is how to integrate the system not only to increase its efficiency, but also its flexibility and its reliability. And that's where we're pushing our analysis right now, understanding how linking heat and electricity systems can help improve the flexibility, storing the variability of certain electricity generators, and being able to transform them either in gas or heat and then distribute them again depending on load. And it's really important to understand the interactions between these technologies and how they affect the overall demand profile to be able to really get the most out of the rolling out of these new technologies. Now, all of this is to say we have to stop thinking about each specific technology stream in isolation. We have to change the paradigm in which we think about energy. We have to move of thinking just about providing energy and really thinking about providing services and how each part of the energy system, both the consumer, the producers, but also the entire set of grids and ancillary services equipment that are there can work together to provide that efficiency, that energy in the most efficient, secure, and affordable way. And of course, you can't do that by working in isolation. So international collaboration is still the key aspect of the work that we do. We work with over 6,000 scientists worldwide from 50 different countries, working together in different areas to highlight where the state of technology is, what are the barriers to that technology uptake, and what we can do to help roll them out. These are a few examples of the groups that we work with specifically on the question of heating and cooling, and we'll definitely keep on pushing towards so that we can provide more and more up-to-date information to help governments understand what they can do to roll the technologies in the most optimal way. And so that's it for me. I hope I was able to keep to timing. I hope I was also able to speak in a way that people can understand. There's lots of information. Very happy to talk to everyone outside, but also to mention that we also have a lot of that information online. So please come and visit us. We'll be very happy to answer questions and see if we can collaborate further. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean-Francois, you've set the bar at exactly 12 minutes. Now your other panelists will be challenged to match that as well. Katharina, will you present from there or do you want to come down to do it from here? Oh, okay. Well, our next speaker then is Katharina Krell, who's the Managing Director of Grenovate Europe. The floor is yours, Katharina.
Thank you, Mary. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be invited to the stage. Thank you for the organizers. My organization, Grenovate Europe, is deeply concerned with system efficiency. Most of the time, people know us from our work on the exploitation of R&D results in green innovations. So we try to improve the system of the efficiency of the innovation system and bridging the gap between research and market by providing the skills to go from public to private, from teams, companies, and from project results to products. But today I'll focus on systems and energy efficiency. I will give you 3 examples of growing complexity. I will look at the system and its efficiency. And the examples of my systems will be a little bit larger. The system will be a little bit larger than the system that Setplan is usually considering, and you will see why. So my first example is a single plant. It's a data center of Google in Saint-Ghislain in Belgium. This site was highly optimized from an energy point of view. It uses the water from a nearby canal to cool the server rooms. Everything perfect on the energy optimization of that plant. However, from the security optimization, it was a little bit different. This summer, we had 4 lightning strikes. The local grid was hit, it went down. The batteries of the data center of Google drained, data was lost. So actually, a little incident for the electricity retailer, something that could have caused billions of losses in damaged data for the final consumer. The message here is that if we consider the optimization of the system, we have to take into account the final consumer. So here, in this case, the owner of the data, because if not, we risk losing on the efficiency of the entire system. The second example comes from industry, from the metal mechanical industry, and the system here is the entire value chain. The Setplan is more systemic right now, and I think it's good, but the system level for industrial energy efficiency is still mostly the single company, and the parameter of optimization is only energy. But from an industry perspective, if we talk about efficiency, it's about competitiveness and savings. And in this aspect, all resources, not only energy, actually can be taken and should be taken into account. Materials, water, and energy. Each material has a very strong energetic footprint, and saving materials can yield enormous energy savings. And by the way, when we model the material reduction, we always express the savings in energy equivalent, raw oil equivalent. Just let me show you on this slide, you see the optimization of a value chain as an entire industrial value chain, and it's the one for hydraulic piston rods, so it's manufacturing. You can visualize the efficiency gains, and you see the different colors, the light green to the dark, are the different, they reflect the energy intensity of the different production steps that are happening in the different companies across the value chain. The width of each color is then the energy intensity of the materials in each production step. Now, the top graph is the situation before optimization, and the one below is after the entire value chain was looked at and optimized from a resource efficiency point of view. Now you can see that the intensity has been more than halved, which is very significant. You can also see, and I want to take some lessons from this slide, the first production step, the light green one, has increased in intensity after optimization slightly, whereas all the subsequent steps have reduced in intensity. Actually, what has happened in the first company, the steel maker has used a higher steel quality, so his product has become more expensive and unsellable had it not taken the entire value chain into account. But this allowed all subsequent companies to realize really significant savings. So this shows that the burdens and the benefits of resource efficiency along entire industrial value chains are not equally distributed across value chain companies. And there is a trade-off. One has to make an investment, maybe the other one is making the saving. It also underlines that the optimization of entire value chains leads to different results and much better results than if only a single company is taken into account. So to come back, we believe that the system should be the value chain and not the individual company, and the optimization should touch not only energy but all the resources to yield the strongest impact on competitiveness. So This then requires material flow analysis across entire value chains, circular concepts, joint action plans, collaborative attitudes. That calls for governance, and very often solving of legal issues as well. The last example is probably the most complex. It's a city district with all its subsystems, energy networks, gas, electricity, thermal, transport, buildings, ICT, the other utilities, and in the middle of all that, people. Just like in the case of industry, it will yield a higher impact to look at areas, groups of buildings, than rather just at a single individual building. So I think synergy effects, joint infrastructure, and integration are the keywords here. And we see them quite well reflected in the smart city call topics that we've seen in FP7 and in Horizon 2020. And also the recent emphasis of DG Energy on the inhabitants, the citizens, shows the understanding that the last part of the value chain, which is actually the consumer, must be included in the optimization strategies to yield the optimum result. That brings me to the challenges, and you won't be surprised to see that I have included also non-technological challenges. On the technology side, it's probably system modeling, techniques to reach resource efficiency, and storage, very important as a game changer and an integrator between the different subsystems that seem to be the most meaningful in terms of a system perspective. On the non-technology side, we see an urgent need to focus on governance issues, distribution of burdens and benefits, legal aspects, and people, because if we don't, then the cooperation that we need for tackling systems with multiple actors will just not happen. We are convinced that addressing value chains from a resource efficiency optimization point of view will help increase European competitiveness. And if we think about the two value chains in Europe that have done this almost to perfection, the aeronautical and the automotive one, well, I think it's clear Europe is world-class there. Regarding the societal impact, well, it's understanding of the end-user value and the behavior of the final consumer that is crucial for system efficiency optimization. Just think about the rebound effect. We think price signals should help to value efficient and deter inefficient behaviors, empower the citizens. But in some cases, there might also be need for smart regulation to rule out the most inefficient decisions in the case that market signals are just not giving the right incentive. I have, I think, no silver bullet on promoting how to promote investment. I think it's clear the authorities have to create favorable, long-term, predictable framework conditions to encourage investment, for instance, into storage. It's clear that political stop and go kills markets and investor confidence. Just look at Spain and the renewable energy market. In terms of gaps, I think, and I'm with other people who have already mentioned it here, the gaps are mainly in the innovations that address the integration issues for resource efficiency. And this integration must take into account the different levels of time, space, and functionality. And the other gap probably is on innovation that maximizes the flexibility of the system while still maintaining its security. This leaves scope for cooperation at European level for the promotion of regional cross-border system innovation based on resource efficiency of entire value chain, linking of European programs with national ones, just in line with set plan philosophy, and probably a harmonization at the regulatory level so that we overcome this terrible fragmentation that we're still facing. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Katharina. And you've raised a number of questions there that I'm sure people would like to come back on during the question and answer session at the end. Perhaps we could move to our next speaker, Dr. Bhagwat, who is the Head of Corporate Energy Affairs at Arubis Belgium, and I think you're going to give us some very interesting illustrations. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Commission, for inviting industry, particularly energy-intensive industry, at such a forum, which gives us chance to say or demonstrate what we have done and what we plan to do. And I must say, the last 5 or 6 years, we have been involved very much in the dialogue, whether it was the energy efficiency regulation, whether it was the ETS system, and this is something which we appreciate. We are never appreciating the fact the proposals are themselves not, let's say, helping competitiveness at the start, but at the end, there is after long debates, I think we are where we can be competitive. And what I want to demonstrate is Arubis is one of the leading players which is competitive at this moment, and we are taking some steps in innovation. However, usually we are very shy about talking about our innovation because we consider it as a very competitive situation. Let us go through, and then I will try to present. So I'm here representing Arubis, but also International Federation of Industrial Energy Consumers Europe, which is an association of many member state organizations, industrial organizations, where I'm sitting in their climate and energy and climate change committees. Also Eurometaux, which is a non-ferrous metals association, where I'm chairing the energy and climate committee, as well as European Copper Institute, which is providing, let's say, end-year solutions for copper. I will also talk about what we have done within our company, what has been the result in quantitative terms, what are the other actions which we have done recently, and what we are planning to do. To start with, I must say my previous speaker has, in fact, already spoken 60% of what I would have liked to speak as about policy recommendation, but nevertheless, just to concentrate, we are on the brown part of the value chain, which is global. It is not only European, it is global, because as many of you know, copper or most of the non-ferrous metals are trade exchange commodities, which means the price of the basic product, copper cathode, is the same all over the world, and we have to compete on the world scale. What we are concentrating, either the first part, the top part, which is starting from ores or concentrates, and converting it into copper cathode, which is 99.999 pure copper, or taking recycled materials, which can even be your smartphone, containing a little bit, very little bit copper and gold and silver and all the other things, which we try to recover in order to get pure copper. So I think in the previous session it was mentioned there could be some loss of quality during recycling. This is not the case in case of copper. But every time we are recycling, it is going to get more energy and it is going to produce more emissions. At the end of it, on the right, it is in black and white because I wanted to concentrate only on the energy intensive part, are the copper products. And usually if we use 1 ton of if we emit 1 ton of CO2 during our production, all our products downstream will probably do something like 500 to 1,000 times saving in the society. Where are we located? We are essentially a European company. Recently, we purchased also an American site to be aware of what's going on with respect to both regulation, but also competitiveness in USA. And we are amazed at different approaches let's say, taken to policymaking. They are not really aware of CO2 or ETS tax or ETS costs, as we may call it. The electricity prices are cheaper there. Nevertheless, we are able to compete today in Europe. We have different sites in different member states, major of them in Germany, Bulgaria, Belgium, Italy, Finland, Netherlands, etc. So we see implementation of energy efficiency directive, for example, but not only, in different member states, and it's quite an interesting, it's a study. What have we done in the past? I will not go through the whole list, but this is what you would normally expect from any technology leader who's, let's say, leading or even writing the best reference technology document, which in which you will find these actions. For example, we have a lot of sulfur-containing ores. Sulfur, as you are aware, when it comes, it is an exothermic process for producing copper. It creates a lot of heat. So you have to manage the charge composition by which we are not producing too much heat that we cannot recover, or we are not producing too little. And we use recycled materials, but it should be then pure, in order to, so to say, cool the process, or in order to smelt the recycled material. So this is sort of process optimization. Now I'm talking about copper, but similar processes also exist in another energy-intensive industry. I think if you go to the website of Spire, where Sustainable Process Industry Resource Efficiency Platform is trying to find out different ways to research this, and Aurubis was part of it in designing these programs. I will not go through this list, but these have already been done. There are other, for example, you can put more oxygen during the flue gases in order to burn the flue gases, by which you are essentially oxidizing the, let's say, impurities, so that the volume of air, volume of the exhaust, which has to be treated, is less. You need less particle filtration, which, by the way, also costs electricity. And that's how we are trying to decrease our consumption. So this is, for example, a turbine for waste heat recovery, for which only last week on Thursday, that's why it is not yet there, we received an award in Germany from the local authorities for having, let's say, converted a project which was economically possible, but really at its limit. So without some, let's say, motivation or encouragement or, let's say, involvement of the district authorities, such projects do not become economic. Okay, so where are we with all this? As I said right in the beginning, we are always measuring ourselves with the global industry. And in general, I think IEA mentioned this earlier also, but European industry is one of the leading one. So not only the, let's say, the best performers, but and on average, European industry is quite good in energy efficiency and is leading. And some of the best performers, like Aurubis, are going even further. What have we achieved? I have taken here only for copper. So when you can isolate, which is not always the case in many of the industries, energy use, consumptions, emissions, etc., only for producing copper, because we are also producing nickel, selenium, etc., all the other metals, then you see that the first almost 70–80% of reduction, what it cost us, the remaining part, 80% of the remaining part cost us about the same amount. So you can imagine that for further reduction, it's going to be, it is already at this moment not economical. We can do it only when it is combined with, so to say, material efficiency. What it means is our material efficiency revenue is to some extent subsidizing our energy efficiency investment. I think this is not fair. When we are going a little bit further in another field of circular economy, like material efficiency or resource efficiency, the burden coming from, for example, ETS, could be reduced proportionately. And this is the discussion we are currently having with, let's say, the stakeholders internally. What are we doing still? Online monitoring, collecting a lot of data, having a big data in the first place only internally. We have not yet connected to our value chain, whether to the suppliers or to the customers, but we are at least, let's say, discussing with them that we are using similar models and modules so that we are able to cooperate when the time is ripe. At this moment, we are not yet doing it. Reporting and analyzing tools, again, this is for internal use, but more and more, we are not discussing just energy, we are discussing charge composition, as I mentioned, so really the total integrated production plant. We have been doing energy audits already since a long time, so I mean, ISO 50001, we have been doing it long. What we are considering, and maybe I can go a little further, is waste heat recovery. As I said, we have a lot of waste heat, but why can't we produce it? I think I mentioned that most of our plants are located in remote locations so that the people around are not affected by, let's say, emissions. These are usually 80 years to 100-year-old plant, and the villages sometimes are close, but sometimes very far. For example, one member in Eurometaux, the closest big village will be something like 50 kilometers away. So it is not always possible to have waste heat recovery completely because the infrastructure today does not exist, but sometimes it is not economical to invest into such infrastructure. Maybe portable heat storage systems, which can be then, let's say, transported just like gas cylinders. That could be an answer, but we have not yet been there. What we will say, decarbonization and energy efficiency must be put in perspective with material extraction efficiency. This is one part. But if you go, for example, to thin tube or thin fin radiators, this requires very thin copper foil, let's say a few microns thick. But to produce that, you need a lot of energy. So do we want the saving of energy to substitute in one way or another the, let's say, consumption of energy in its production phase? This is a point which we need to discuss. What we also think was also mentioned earlier is the storage. It's definitely something interesting. As you can imagine, our processes are 365 days continuously running and running at its maximum capacity. So we have very little possibility to modulate in copper. In aluminum, for example, this is different, or in other sectors where there is overcapacity, they can shut down a part of the plant in order to help peak shaving. But in case of copper, this is not possible, so we are studying the possibility of using large-scale storage. But then you can imagine that in our side, there will not be a place for pump storage. So if there is something equivalent, but at a cost of pump storage, we will be certainly interested even in investing to see how it can help us. These are, let's say, I already mentioned circular economy, and the carbon burden should be proportionately reduced as compared to the contribution to the circular economy. We can go later on in the side, but what we are already doing is having closed loop with some of our, let's say, customers where we know their process quality, where we know their scrap, that, for example, it is not mixed with oil, which we can take back at quite good prices for them in order to reuse it. And if possible, we would like to set this circular economy principle even to our second-tier customers and the third-tier customers to have collection system by which we are able to do it. Because essentially our interaction with those customer and customer's customer is in developing new alloys, developing new, let's say, base materials by which they are able to produce these technologies. And this is important. The technologies are usually developed in Europe, and it's important that also the energy-intensive part of that value chain remains in Europe in order to help develop this technology. In summary, I think you will see exactly the same thing what I've said earlier. To go further, in order to stay in time, these are the different IFIAC member federations. If you have any questions later on, I will be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Bagua. That was extremely interesting, and I know certainly has raised a number of questions in my mind that I'd like to come back to in our panel exchange afterwards. Maybe we could now move to our next speaker, who I don't think needs a lot of introduction. Monica Frassoni is president of the European Alliance to Save Energy, is a well-known figure in, shall we say, the Brussels bubble? Yes, yes, yes. I won't go any further. I'll just hand you the floor, Monica. The floor is yours, please. Do you want to stay there, or do you want to come down? Do you need a cushion?
All right. Next time, perhaps you can put the thing a bit more like that. Okay, so my name is Monica Frassoni. I'm the president of the European Alliance to Save Energy, which is multi-stakeholder organization, as we call them in Brussels, to actually push for the agenda of energy efficiency, starting from a membership which is from business, think tank, and also we have a couple of honorary members from the European Parliament. And we actually are absolutely convinced that the future belongs to coalition or to a gathering in which the economic operators, policymakers and NGOs and think tanks are all working in the same direction and perhaps competing with other similar organizations in a very transparent way. So I think that we are bringing over a specific agenda which I believe is quite important in the discussion we are having today, and I'm very grateful for this invitation to this very important event. We were asked a few questions, and the first is about the technology challenges for energy efficiency. Well, the first thing I want to say is that the major technology challenge is to make sure that technologies that exist are actually implemented and used. And this is in itself is a technological issue because in the moment in which you have a technology which is beautiful, is there, but you don't use it for all sorts of reasons, it is also presenting a real problem in terms of waste and in terms of lost opportunity. So the way, and I think that this is an element that has been very central in the discussion today, in which you can integrate the different technologies existing and to make sure that they work towards a similar objective is something that is quite important. In the SET communication, it is talked about a death valley, which is the difference between the distance that exists between the invention, let's say, and the fact that this invention can be used. And I think that there is a double death valley. One is this, and the other one is actually to get the enough support and enough awareness to understand that this death valley has to be overcome. And I think that that is something that is very much present today in our discussion, in the sense that when technology is there, you need an innovative way of thinking how to be able to actually put it in action. You see here in the slide, but I will not go into the details because these are numbers which are more or less known, that you have a lot of potential, not only savings, but also all sorts of positive results in case you are able to use the insulation and renovation technologies that are available today. The improvement is, of course, always possible, and as I mentioned before, the main challenge for both new build and also renovation is the building chain ability to take up new technologies and improving the implementation of these technologies and services. I think that we have to take into account the fact that today only 1.5% of every year is the renovation rate every year, and that only 44% of windows are actually double glazed, and all sorts of figures you have today to tell us that we are certainly not on track in terms of what we could do, even if technology is there. And I think that that is a very important element for our sector in general. It was already mentioned before by some of the speakers, we have a very big or a substantial competitive position in energy efficiency. This is certainly not the case for other sectors, and so we have to keep it very dear. And that is something that the predominant market share in energy efficiency technologies is not very well known, perhaps because it is a very spread technology. I mean, it touches lots of sectors, which are probably not even communicating among themselves. And indeed, one of the targets that we pose for ourselves is the fact of making these technologies and also this advantage in the market to emerge clearly, so that people are aware, policymakers are aware, but also economic operators are aware of how good they are. And the fact of not working in silos was also one very important message that this conference is trying to put up, and which is very, very important for our sector. We are also moving, and I think that that is another important point, in an environment which is an environment which is competing for resources. And I think that this issue of the positive competitive position of the European Union is an element that, in energy efficiency, is an element that has to be taken into account very much when deciding to whom to give the resources available. And perhaps this is another point that we need to underline very much, because in the moment in which you think that you are competitive because you are good, you are actually wrong. I think that the way in which you are competitive is when you are able to count on a framework and on a context which is positive for, and it is conducive for your competitiveness. And I think that we are now at a very crucial moment, not only because we are designing a new energy system, or at least we are trying to see what are the main parts that this new energy system should have, but also because we have to be very clear and very transparent about which are the best and which are the champions that are leading us toward this new system. And by the way, as I mentioned in the presentation, in terms of insulation and renovation, the European Union is certainly a champion, and they are all very big actors and very visible actors, and I think that that is something that has to be taken into account. Also, and there perhaps our American friends are perhaps not better, but more visible and more able to sell what they do. Under the behavioral point of view, the energy efficiency is also something that has to be taken in, that has to be really underlined. It's, once again, it's not only a question of technology, but the technology has to accompany the capacity of the system in general to change the behavior of consumers, and to accompany the capacity of consumers to be motivated and to be actually ready to change their behavior. So once again, yes, it is technology, but it is all sorts of other things around it. And I think that when we are talking about what we need, certainly legislation, rules of the game, having a framework which is lasting and it doesn't stop or change in a couple of years, is certainly at least as important as having a good framework for innovation. If I have to make a slight criticism to the communication of the Commission on SET, certainly there is a insufficient emphasis given to how important legislation it is. I heard the previous panel, also there was a lot of emphasis given there, and I think that if you want to push for a system technology, for a strategy on technology and on improving the technology, you need to have legislation which is directing the technology. And I think that in that paper, this element is certainly not enough emphasized. I think that next year, it will be a very important year under that point of view. And I see Mary already smiling. I think that we are going to have a lot of fun. Probably we will have a lot of discussion. And I think that some of the organizations in Brussels has already started hostility in a way. And I think that there will be some results, above all on the Energy Efficiency Directive, that we will have to keep dear, like the issues concerning Article 7, or Article 3 and all the rest of it. So I think that under this point of view, the capacity of integrate what is written in the communication, on the set plan communication, and what we are actually going to do in the legislation is going to be quite important. I was talking briefly about the issue of behavioral, now we were asked about the societal impact and the impact of consumers. I think that here is probably where the issue of the competition on resources is more clear. Or is more evident, because in this very moment, a lot of public resources go into pushing for fossil fuel subsidies, and I think that there is a real challenge in trying to make a comparison between what is best for the consumer in terms of expenses and in terms of resources and in terms of advantages. There are a lot of studies done on how energy efficiency can push economic growth and job creation, but nothing of this falls from the sky. You know, it is not just that you just decide to have a job creation because you become more efficient in energy. You have to create a whole system around it, and you have to be very clear on return of public spending, on net saving, and all the rest of it. And I think that there are still a couple of challenges ahead of us, and the first challenge is certainly the fact that you need to convince local authorities, public authorities, not necessarily at national and European level, but mostly at local level, that there are funds and there are companies that are ready to help them to become more efficient in that sense, and that you need also to make those technologies more affordable in order to be able to reach your goal. Now, the last point that I would like to touch briefly is how to promote investment in energy efficiency. I already spoken about the need to have clear regulation. We made in 2011 an event only with banks and hedge funds, and all they told us is we don't need subsidies, we don't need incentives, what we need is clear regulation and clear line of behavior by public authorities. And I think that that is certainly something that we need to push forward very much. There was a very interesting report from the Energy Efficiency Financial Institution Group, which identified a lot of obstacles that are still there, and I'm not going to go into the detail because I almost finished my time, but I would like to mention that there is one point that is mentioned in the SET communication, which for me is really very open still, and that is the capacity of EFSI to actually be an instrument, an efficient instrument to push energy efficiency, notably in small-scale projects. And that is something that we were not perhaps able to convince very much EIB, and in which we still have to work a little bit to be able to deliver, because if in EFSI there will be only big projects financed, I think that we will lose a lot, a big occasion to show that energy efficiency can be a game changer in the next energy system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Monica, and you've pressed a few buttons there, as you can appreciate. Can we move now to our last speaker, Jasper van den Munkhoff, who is the manager of Energiesprong, and I presume you'll work from there, and if you will take the floor, please. Thank you.
I think I'm going to be the first one who's standing up, because like peeping over to get the screen is a bit hard for me. Good afternoon. My name is Jasper van den Munkhoff, and I'm the manager of a program which is focused on energy transition in the built environment. What we did in the last 5 years comes down to more or less this. It's a retrofit of a house to net zero energy levels, done within a week, and doesn't cost you a cent more in your cost of living when this house has been retrofitted. We see it as a way to kind of modernize our building stock and to give people something they actually want to eat. You know, we talk a lot about technology and you know what kind of technologies would be least cost, but we as a consumer, we just buy things. You know, and we buy things we like, we buy things a neighbor becomes jealous of. So we thought, what do people buy? People buy kitchens. So let's see if we can make it as nice as a good kitchen. So this was one of the early prototypes. And we moved on, and I'll tell you a bit about the story which we went through. First thing we did was make a macro business case of the Netherlands, and the collective household energy bill in the Netherlands is about 13 billion euros. And that's a lot of money. And we thought, just let's say we take that as a pay down on a loan. How much can we invest? And we come down to 260 billion, only in the Netherlands. So that's the market potential for builders to produce better products, converting the energy bill into an energy efficient investment. This is about 35,000 per household we just have in our pockets. We are paying that now at this moment. So we only need to kind of combine that into a micro business case for a regular consumer who wants this. And that's a bit of a challenge. So I would say the last 5 years of my work was how to come to that, from that macro picture into that micro business case for people. We said 4 things. It has to be very good. You know, the quality of the thing we are buying should have no doubts, because we are converting an energy bill into a capital investment. So these packages come with a long year warranty, about 10 to 30 years, on the energy performance of the whole house. That meaning all technology in that house, also the assembly of the whole technology, has to work for 30 years. It has to be non-intrusive. If it takes us 3 to 6 months to retrofit our house, nobody's going to start because we just got children, or we're going to have children, or my grandmother will be, sick, or whatever. It needs to be a fast intervention as we buy a kitchen, because that will be delivered in one day and be installed in one day. So actually, we really wish for one-day installation of these things. It has to be affordable. If we pay so much on energy bills today, if we can transfer these energy bills into a mortgage or an extra rent or whatever, people don't really have to think about, is this substituting to other things I want to do? It's just something I can pay for my monthly payments at this moment. And the last thing, it has to be very nice to look at, and the neighbors should say, this guy is improving in life, and I'm not yet. So it had a bit of an impact. If you look at the building sector, they are mostly craftsmanship-based. They do projects, and every project they think again. But hardly they just see the building stock as nice platforms to innovate on. And from a conceptual base, you have in the Netherlands 2.4 million houses which are exactly the same. So why not really think once really long on how to solve these retrofit issues? So what we've seen in the Netherlands is that this building sector has to industrialize. It starts with 3D scanning, that goes into a building information management system, and then it goes to off-site manufacturing, not as we do at this moment, in the rain, in the wind, outside with Polish employees. No, it has to be people working in factories, having quality systems, because if you want to have a guarantee on quality for 30 years, you cannot do it wrong. If you want to have price levels going up to that, let's say, same cost of living, you need to have a production capacity which is a lot more efficient than we do at this moment. So this is pushing the building industry towards industrialization. Yep. That was not the only thing. So on one hand, you have demand, which is needed. Consumers and in the Netherlands, housing associations wanting these packages. On the other hand, you have supply, which needs to kind of have a quite radical way, a different way of producing and delivering these packages. And then you have a whole bunch of regulations. And I couldn't have like a better introduction than Monica gave me, because this needs to be an integral package. You need to have mortgage changes. You need to have law changes and rental laws. You need to have local regulations which are different. You need to have different ways of valuating houses. And we did all that. And what we saw is that these whole system changes, these energy transition paths, are not kind of silver bullet games. Nothing has happened until everything was changed. And once everything has been changed, things go really fast. But we normally focus on one technology, one regulation, one kind of financial instrument. But once you take them all together and kind of make it a market-ready proposition, I just can throw into the market to consumers, and they can actually buy that, and they're willing to buy that, and they're able to buy that, then you will see markets coming to life. So this was a one-day retrofit. So just imagine, as a consumer, you go to work, give your key to some kind of builder, and at the end of the day, you have a new house. And this is not a kind of thing we thought of in university. We have 30 builders in the Netherlands, 4 which are actually building these prototypes, building these packages at this moment. We have 30 other builders developing these packages, thinking of how to combine them with people wanting to live longer in their house because they're elderly and they need care in their house, thinking of how to combine that with, we have in the northern Netherlands, earthquakes, with reinforcing these houses also. So this is something we have, I think, about 500 built and about 11,000 in contract, which will come online in the next 2 years. So this is a market reality. Just to give you a bit of a feel of what it is, so we have a new facade, a new roof with a full-fledged solar panel on it. It has a complete installation, and maybe I just switch back one, that's possible. If you look from a technology point of view, you see that first you need this concept. I always say first you need to think of a car, and then you can think of the headlight of the car. But don't develop a headlight without knowing what the car should be. So technology should fit into these packages which people actually want to buy. So if you look at the left side there, you see that white thing on the facade. That's the whole installation of the house. So what they did is they kind of pre-packaged the whole thing into one box, which they can easily pre-assemble and then just stick to the wall. These walls have all the ventilation ducts already pre-installed in there. And if you look at like the facade as a development platform, you can use different materials, you can use different building methodologies, they're now thinking we actually have window frames because we used to build brick houses and then we needed to put the frame in. When we build facades, who needs a window frame? So these builders are really rethinking the way they should retrofit these houses. Good. To just give you a bit of a view on that, this is one of the most important things I actually want to tell you. So we have this transition going on, and I just explained that we need all these lights on green before things happen, and there is a way of doing that. So how do you actually achieve that point? So we closed the deal between a few big housing associations in the Netherlands and the 4 biggest builders in the Netherlands to say, okay, we're going to renovate 111,000 of these houses. That's a hard contract of 11,000, and that's like a potential of 100,000 once these retrofits work. That wasn't only done. So we had a lot of demand, we had a lot of supply, and the supplier said, once we have such a big demand, we are willing to invest in these new prototypes, in these new kinds of technologies, in these new types of delivery of these packages, in new ways of producing retrofits. So you need mass demand. We needed a completely new supply. We have the ministry who said, if there's 100,000 of these houses to be retrofitted, we are willing to change the rental law. So we now have like a change of law in cabinet, which is being pushed through at this moment. But also the financing of these retrofits. So for your idea, this will cost about 65,000 euros, including new bathroom, new kitchen, including VAT. So it needs some financing to actually get that done. And also the financier of these associations were willing to do this. So you need quite a lot of actors in the field joining together, signing a deal to do this. And then we had at one time all the lights on green. We did the same for the private homeowner market, which was not as easy as this, but it included like the municipalities, it included the mortgage banks, it included the surveyor associations, it included a lot more builders, and it included building industry. But we did the same just to get everybody to make, at the same time, that step change they need to make. Good. This is what it looks like if you do a whole area. This was a little experiment. They thought, let's just have people choose their own house. We can make 4 facades, and how does it actually look like when people start choosing? Do they choose the same or do they choose differently? This is what they did. Can also be done in high-rise. So this was one of the early prototypes. This whole block has been done now, and we are now up to 6-story high, which can be net zero based on solar panels only. One of the most important things is once you have this concept together, and everybody knows kind of we need to make these kind of retrofits, you see that development is in a few forms. First of all, you have innovation in the concept itself. So this is Volker Wessels. These are the 4 prototypes, and the last one you saw in the film. The first one costed 100,000 euros, and it took them 2 weeks to retrofit. The second one was only 80K, and it cost them a week. And then the last one you saw, they were able to do it in 1 day, and it only cost you 65,000 euros. So you see that only with the same technology as we had before, it's only conceptually innovating already brings prices down. And then the other thing is, this is one of the components. This is the installation components. First prototype of Ballas Nedam. Costed 25,000 euros, and this is what it looked like. So your whole attic is actually an installation. Now you have this installation on the front walls, you actually have a new room in your house, so you expand the space you have. So they started like this Chinese kind of industrialization process and just assembling it off-site and then placing it. And that brought down the prices to about 16,000 euros. At this moment, we have the whole package for about 12,000 euros. But if you look at really industrialized, mass volume produced technology, this is like a VW engine, and the cost price of such a lot more complicated thing than these installations is 600 euros. So if you look at the technology and the price perspective of all these different components, you see that when you really push innovation in a certain direction, you can go to price levels we haven't seen yet. So the Netherlands is quite a small country, and that was good, because to start such a thing, you shouldn't have mass volume of players in the market. But now that we actually developed these first steps, we see a lot of interest from the UK and France, which kind of have the same building stock, which kind of makes it easy to understand, but it doesn't really matter which building stock you have. But so we're now expanding to the UK, which already has started an organization, Energiesprong UK, and we're expanding into France via Interreg to kind of scale up these retrofits, because what we first have done is have contractors make these components and assemble these components, but the next step is having building industry rethinking the materials they deliver and rethinking the packages they deliver as a building industry. And that's only going to start when we have scale, which is a lot bigger than the Netherlands. So thank you for your interest.
Thank you very much indeed. A very interesting presentation. And I'm thinking of my own house at home. Would it take more than 8 hours to do something with it? Probably. I'd have to tidy it inside before I'd let anybody in anyway. We've had a very interesting set of presentations, quite diverse in their coverage. And I think that confirms the point that we said at the beginning, that in fact, energy efficiency is not one single thing. It's not one single technology. It's not happening in one single place. I picked up a few issues out of the discussion. And maybe I could start with the industrial side, please, if I may. Katharina, you were talking about you need to know your customer, and you need to know your customer's customer, in fact, and the priorities of our customer. And that means that you need to work through the value chain down the whole length of the industrial process. And indeed, Dr. Bhagwat, you were talking about that as well, about bringing the whole of the industrial area together. The question I was asking myself is, how do you achieve that? Because, we as people, we're individuals and we like being individual, but I think industry is even more individualistic than people. And to say to companies you have to work together or you have to jointly do things, it's a big challenge. So how would you see, what should we be doing in that area? What's the innovation that we should bring into that domain to make it happen?
A good question. I don't have the silver bullet answer. Indeed, what we have done, we have confronted different industry sectors with, this slide about the resource efficiency savings and the potential for savings. The reactions were very different across industry sectors. Some were aware, some were actually not. They were more thinking about the efficiency in their own company. There are industrial sectors where cooperation is something like a no-go. You don't even talk to each other. It's like a black box. I don't want to give out any information. Other sectors, and probably it's not only about sectors, it's also about mentalities. Like we have had experience from the Nordic countries, from Scandinavian clusters, very integrated, talking to each other, a long culture of, oh, but we're doing this already forever, why are you telling us this? This is nothing new. And then going to the UK with the chemical industry, oh no, we don't talk to each other. No, actually, I don't even know the person. I think it starts with awareness. If you know what you have to gain, what you could gain from cooperation, that is the first incentive. Because the competitiveness impact is significant. I think it should not be overlooked. But I think sector by sector, the approach.
Dr. Bhagwat, and actually can I, excuse me, refer to one of your slides that I found very interesting. You showed Arubis and the energy consumption at a very low figure. But you showed the average for Europe, I think at about 2,400, if I remember, which in fact was higher than the US and Japan. So there was a very marked difference between your own company and the average of the other European companies. So where do we move in that space?
Maybe I didn't understand your question, but it is a specific energy consumption which is the lowest in our company with respect to the ones in the other countries, and that comes because of, let's say, the energy cost plays a dominant role. In our case, the energy cost is, so to say, 1/3 of our operational costs. So we are doing everything we can since a long time in order to save it. That is the first thing. Then if you consider the environmental regulations, for example, sulfur dioxide emissions, which requires also capture of sulfur dioxide, conversion to sulfuric acid, etc., recuperating these are different in different countries. So if you see you will see a similar graph like what I showed with the energy efficiency or specific energy intensity or specific emission intensity. For sulfur, it is even much more pronounced that we are much better as compared to the others because we use this sulfuric acid, for example, as a chemical which can then be sold onto the market when the market conditions are right. Coming back to your first questions, what we have done, I think our customers, so third layer is ourselves, our employees for the first extent. And they are also to some extent ambassadors talking to their suppliers, which are our customers' customer. And we have usually traditionally every year a customers' day where we are inviting our value chain partners. One of these days, we extended it to have Energy Efficiency Day, and we invited our suppliers of energy efficiency equipment to demonstrate their products in a very simple way that our own employees could ask questions, etc. And of course, the customers were also entertained to ask questions. In some sites, not in all, but in some sites, we are working with, let's say, small-scale industries, more a horizontal network. They are not exactly in our value chain, but they are our associates, explaining what we have done. And if there are questions on energy efficiency, we are exchanging experiences. But we are also learning, because some things which we considered minor are very big things. And when you, I think you said it earlier, we are not discussing one shot, we are discussing maybe hundreds, several small actions, and we are learning by this kind of exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Both Monica and Jasper were talking about consumers, more on the residential and indeed the consumer side. Do consumers care? And how can we motivate and indeed support consumers who do care to take action, to move from thinking about it to actually doing something about it?
Like how do you actually do it? And also the question is, where do you start? Just doing it or thinking of it? And what we did is, so you have this overall view, and I think everybody is quite aware of the whole overall view of this market. But if you start doing it, you see what you can sell. You see what can be done within regulation and without, where you need to tune regulation. So I would advise that you have two streams. One is, you need to have thinking going on about the future. But what I see in Europe at this moment is that there are not enough teams who take leadership in doing it. So I had 50 million of the Dutch government with 3 guys to do a project. And that gave me the ability to actually lead in the market. And that is something which is so scarce in Europe. There are people who get government money, but they get a task. And then it's very political, and every 2 years they need to do something else. But you need these groups of people who are able to kind of lead forward in doing things. And then I think if you match that with all these technical aspects and all these technical innovation which is going on and the thinking is going on, I think you have a brilliant combination.
I think that there is already a lot of awareness from the part of consumers, but I think that the challenge is to link the carrot with the stick and the example. In the sense that if you work with local authorities, for example, and they know that they have to put in place certain, by obligation, let's say, certain schemes, then they will be motivated also to ask their own citizens to change their behavior. But if they don't have that, then it will be more difficult. On the other hand, if technologies are not there, if people are not particularly pushy, and if they don't see the examples, is going to be also difficult. I was very struck by one event that happened in Cardiff some years ago. You probably are aware of that, where some people were actually offered just without any cost to totally renovate their house. And they said no because they didn't want to go through the hassle. So I think that that is something that has to be very present. It's not only a problem of laws, it's not only a problem of money, it's a problem of all of it. But if you don't start, you will not go anywhere. But I think that we are actually on the good way there.
Maybe just a final question before I open it to the floor. Jean-Francois, everybody else has said we have all the technology that we need. You were the only person who said we need new technologies. What do we need in terms of new technologies, and how are we going to get there?
I think it's probably one of the most difficult questions when we're talking about energy efficiency, because it's true that we have very good technologies that are not being deployed to the effect they can be. But if you look at what is needed for the next 30 or 40 years, what you can't do is forget about feeding the pipeline with yet better technologies as we go along. That's really that whole feedback loop between saying, okay, we set a standard so that people can actually meet that standard today, but we think about the next standard so that the innovation chain can start thinking about getting the technology for that next standard. So new technologies don't necessarily mean game changers. It's often more an improvement than a complete change, but that R&D needs to evolve on a regular basis, both on today's technologies and also in some of the technologies that may not, like if we look at storage, we have certain types of storage, but we don't have all the storage technology that we need in terms of cost and performance to make them cost effective everywhere. So the same can apply to most of these technologies. It's not that we need a complete revolution, but we need to make sure that the technology's performance evolve as we need to ratchet down our energy consumption.
That's good. It sounds like we have a future for Setplan going forward. Can I open the floor and ask, are there any comments or questions that anybody would like to raise or ask of the panelists? Please, if you just give your name and where you're from and a brief question, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm Gudni Johannesson from the National Energy Authority of Iceland. I was very interested by the speech given by Mr. Gagné here, who showed very clearly that we have a very bad management of the energy quality in our system. We are using high quality energy for low quality purposes. And when we discuss the policy issues, we see that we are very far in policies on the end use of energy in buildings and so on, but we have very poor policies on conversion. We allow direct use of electricity, gas, or other high-quality fuels for converting to, for instance, heat at temperatures between 50 and 100 degrees. And we have the same for the cooling. Isn't it the cheapest and most cost-efficient and fastest way to CO2 emissions reduction to simply forbid this?
I think to be able to properly forbid this, you need to be able to understand what is available where. And that's still one of the biggest issues that we have, is that data, that big data availability requirement in terms of the quality of the energy that is available and the proximity of demand is still fairly nascent. As I said, we've seen some interesting posters just in the past 2 days on work that is going on there. But that's part of understanding what the opportunities are, is really understanding the need and the supply and the distance between the two of them. You have a certain quality of heat, you have the choice of using it in your own process. If you can get something out of it, you can increase its temperature to send it to somewhere else who needs it at that higher temperature, or you can basically downgrade it to produce just lower quality heat if you've got a customer, and the cost effectiveness of this. It was very impressive to see the type of process heat being reutilized in an optimized process like a copper production scheme. In most industries, that is being done because they know their needs and their supplies in their entire front. When we're looking at trying to apply that to a community level, then you get to have a lot more stakeholders that need to be very generous in terms of providing that data, and it's that whole capacity that needs to be built to really be able to use the energy at its highest value.
I can't see because I'm looking into a spotlight. It's very hard to see. I see it at the back there, please.
Thank you. Laura Danagina, representing the Aspire PPP, Public-Private Partnership. I wanted to to confirm two issues. The fact that indeed we will need innovative processes. So thank you, Mr. Gagné. And also to answer one of your questions, Ms. Donnelly, the fact that we have a way to get there, because we have this new public-private partnership that is actually bringing together 8 sectors. They're working together for the first time exactly on bringing about this innovative technologies within the process industry. And what I wanted to stress as a complement to Mr. Bhagwat is the fact that we are looking at energy efficiency within one plant, within one sector, but one of the unique features is that we are looking at cross-sectoriality, what can be done there, especially through what it's called now industrial symbiosis. So basically, how do we take advantage of the waste energy of one and make it a resource for another? And this is especially important in the framework of the 2 objectives that we have in terms of low carbon technologies and circular economy, because these are purposes that we can serve through industrial symbiosis. And here last remark, the fact that in this specific framework, we really need to pay attention at the link between energy efficiency and resource efficiency, that we don't miss that in creating this nexus and not bringing about negative impacts if we play with one and not paying attention to the other one. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure. I think people perhaps maybe are hungry, so we might close the session. Just if I can just maybe not to summarize, because I think it's not necessary to summarize as such, but I think it's very visible that in terms of the challenge that is before us for energy efficiency, it's a multitudinous, multifaceted challenge. We are all actors as individuals and in our daily lives at home, but also our daily lives at work. We have technologies, we're not using them well enough, we need to do that, we need to continue to develop the technologies. But I suppose the single issue that we need to look at and move on is behavioural change. Unfortunately, that's a very tough call. Behavioural change is really, really hard. It's a slow-moving boat, but we have to keep moving it, keep pushing it, because in the end of the day, it brings huge results for us as individuals and indeed also for our society. So I'm just going to say thank you very much for your participation in the panel. Thank you to the speakers, and hand the floor to
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mary, for this interesting and fruitful discussions. Also to the panelists to keep good in time and for these interesting speeches. It's time for lunch. As Mary told already, lunch is being served at the ground floor, so 1 down. We meet back here at 2 o'clock. Enjoy your meal.